Gina.
Hey!
Let me just talk to these guys here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, guys, this is Gina. Guys, Gina is a mental health therapist. On your profile, your bio, you talk about working with people specifically with PTSD. Um, what does that look like for the everyday person? And the reason why I'm asking this is because I don't know if you're like most people on here might think like me. The first time I ever heard about PTSD was with the military, people who have come back from the military. And I always thought, oh, you only get PTSD when you go to war and bombs drop and you're in the midst of all that craziness. But I have come to learn that I too suffer from PTSD in some shape or form. So what does that look like for the everyday person?
So that's a really great question. And for a lot of people, just like you, they learned about PTSD through the military community. And that was kind of like what got that diagnosis on the DSM. Folks coming back, especially like World War II veterans, coming back very much different than the way they left.
Right.
And so what that looks like is really stuckness, a loss of connection to the self.
Okay.
Because what we know about trauma is that it impacts the way that you think, it impacts the way that you feel, it impacts the way that you move in the world, and it even impacts the way that you view the world.
Wow.
So what that looks like is experiencing just like chronic, prolonged stress and distress, which is really common, right?
Yes.
A difficulty being present is a huge one. That's something that I see often. Avoidance of things that feel charged, heavy, assumed to be unmanageable. Trust is a huge one. I mean, we can talk about trust for a long time, but just like a really hard time trusting being in the world, being in your body, being in your life, you know? And then we have things like, and these are, I guess, the ones we kind of see in like mainstream, like a movie or something, like intrusive thoughts and hypervigilance. And I think sometimes those can be a little exaggerated on movies and kind of like made to think that like those are like the primary trauma symptoms. Like you can experience trauma and not have like intrusive thoughts or hypervigilance, right? But these are also symptoms of trauma.
That's a lot. Give me an example of something just very simple that could trigger PTSD, like a simple everyday thing, like anything.
Domestic violence in the home. Growing up with a parent who, let's say, they never put their hands on your mom or you, but it was charged. Let's say this parent struggled with drugs. So like being in close proximity, either having a sibling or a parent who struggled with addiction, being robbed, you know? But even in the DSM, we see that trauma is something that you can directly experience, something that you can witness, learning about something that happened to a close friend or family member, or even just like a repeated exposure to something. So for example, a repeated exposure to trauma. So something like something that I experienced when I was back in the day, working as a trauma therapist, to being too new, too green as a trauma therapist, and having just a lot of exposure to trauma every day. And I think for me, what was challenging was that I was working with children. Yeah. So, so like people like cops or doctors could experience something like trauma or vicarious trauma, which is what they call it.
Quick side question, because you mentioned cops. Do you think that the response that we're getting, the racial overtone, the racial um, stuff that we're dealing with cops is many times a result of PTSD?
Absolutely.
Continued PTSD that is not resolved. And okay.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Um, I never thought that I could experience any of these things, but of course, when my mom passed, I speak about very openly, talking about anxiety, depression, wanting to commit suicide. But I remember getting robbed when I was in college. I parked my car at 1 o'clock outside of my classroom, went to class, came back out at like 2:30, and my car was broken into. And I remember I wasn't even there. I didn't know who did it. I wasn't around. But the thought of somebody violating my space had me shook for weeks. I got rid of the car. I couldn't be in the car anymore. Because in my head, I was just like, I don't know who you were. And I know you weren't in here for very long, because it couldn't have been very long, because you didn't get anything, you didn't take anything. But the fact that you were in here really shook me. And of course, I didn't talk to anybody about it. It went by. But as you were talking, I'm thinking back and I'm like, wow, I experienced that was traumatic for me, because I had to get rid of the thing that symbolized a violation of my trust. And I think that's what a lot of us go through.
Absolutely. And I mean, and that, I'm so sorry to hear that happened to you. That sounds like a really intense experience. And it also brings me to a point that I've been trying to, like, I'm very much into like trauma research, just to know what's happening. But there's this doctor that I really love. His name is Dr. Gabor, and he says that, something like this, like your car broken into, is not necessarily trauma, but it's traumatic. The trauma is what happens inside of you. So that fear, right? That kind of like creepish feeling, like that your boundaries were so closely crossed, like the what if,
right?
Yeah. The fact that you probably did not feel, I don't want to assume and put words in your mouth, and please feel free to like correct me if I'm wrong, but you probably did not want to drive that car.
I didn't. I got rid of it. I did.
Because it was too dysregulating. And that's kind of like that's kind of the what the trauma does to the body. It dysregulate, and it like kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? It impacts your ability to respond and to cope with the things that are going on.
So how does a person, and this, I have explained so far very mild things, I would consider mild in terms of like traumatic experiences, but for somebody who's experiencing stuckness and all of this loss of connection to the self, lack of trust, avoidance, all of this stuff that's going on in them, how do they recognize and get themselves out of it? How does that happen? Or does that take you being recommended by a doctor or someone? Like how, because I'm just thinking to myself, a lot of us walk around with a lot of trauma in us, like the effects of trauma in us. And a lot of times they go unheeded. Sometimes we're not aware that the thing that we experience is what's affecting us now. So where does that trigger or that awareness come from?
So, I'm thinking of so many things. So first, I want to emphasize the fact that, like, just as like people of color living in this country, like Black women, we're already carrying like ancestral traumas because we are people who have been colonized, right? Then there's the layers of like racism, microaggressions, the patriarchy, so gender. So there's a lot happening.
Right.
I also want to kind of like break down types of trauma. So you can have, for example, a single event trauma. So that can be like would happen to you, like the robbery.
Right.
You can have complex trauma, which is
Mm-hmm.
actually which is something you may see in somebody who has like distinct marginalized experience,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're queer and you're Black,
Mm-hmm.
if yeah, you're kind of like having to manage a lot,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
There's acute trauma,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that like for example, sometimes it's kind of hard to like see the distinction between if you have a loss,
Okay.
like between,
Yes.
because it's acute, it like just happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or like a I went to over chronic.
Chronic.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, chronic. So having experienced trauma throughout like a long periods of time. So like having the parent who's an addict, having the violence in the home,
Mm-hmm.
being repeatedly beaten like as a child.
Mm-hmm.
So then to go just like having this context, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, whew, that's a lot, right?
Right.
But so how do you pull yourself out of it? I think even that kind of thinking is problematic. I don't think you get out of trauma. You get through with trauma. Part of it is helping, at least in the work that I do and a lot of the trauma therapists that I know, is helping people reconnect with the parts of themselves that have been shattered, repressed, damaged because of the trauma. So you're learning to be with.
Okay.
As opposed to get through.
Right. Or
right?
rid of. Right.
Or rid of.
Yes.
Because that in itself is a form of resistance, right? I don't want this thing. I want it to go away. It makes me angry. It makes me, when I get home, I need a drink. I got to get the edge off. Like, already that's a lot of energy, right? And part of actually trauma work, which I find so fascinating, is that it's actually quite slow. Okay. It's actually kind of like helping and inviting people to like be in their bodies and be aware of like what is actually happening and going on. Helping them notice, right? The triggers, the people, the things that are said that kind of like, that bring that whatever it is up.
That really reminds me that's very significant for me, because when my mom died, I remember during my journaling, it was a very slow. It was over 3.5 years, but it was slow, and it was I remember feeling everything. Like if you asked me through that 3.5 years, I could tell you that I went from this to this, and I knew it was so slow. But it was through the journaling that I started realizing that I didn't feel like smashing glass anymore. That was last year. Right now, I'm okay. I don't want to do that. I don't feel like beating people up anymore. I'm okay. I've gotten to the point where if you've angered me, I'm just stay out of my way, pretty much. So I moved on but I felt everything in my body. I felt all of the pain, all of the emptiness, every emotion that ever came. And I was thinking to myself, has to be the hardest thing that anybody ever go through in their life. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, because grief is very traumatic, so I totally get what you were saying about feeling everything, and it is a slow process. I think for us, we always want to get past something so fast to get back to life, but the thing that we don't realize that we are living life. This is life, and part of the life is not always being on the mountaintop. Sometimes you got to be down in this valley for any particular amount of time. That's the yin and that's the yang. That's what it is. It's up and down, left and right. It's twofold. So yeah. So you said that you mentioned that you have this new healing technique that you recently discovered. Am I saying that right?
I'm like, ooh, what? No, I have. I have some healing techniques I wanted to talk about, but I found this theory I'm really digging right now, and it's called betrayal trauma theory, which says that depending on the proximity of like, let's say the person that inflicted the trauma, or that like that the difficulty, traumaticness on you, depending on your closeness and level of attachment, it becomes harder for the person experiencing the trauma to essentially like betray them or turn your back on them. I think this is really interesting, especially for people who are in domestic violence relationships, right? Which is like, for people on the outside, is really hard to understand. Like, I'm sure I've said something like that in my past years. Like, why can't you just leave? You know, him or her? Yeah. But yeah, you know, like some research is showing that it's just harder to step back, to condemn, to hold accountable, given the level of closeness.
Is that syndrome? What's that syndrome they talk about where you... Stockholm syndrome, yes. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder, do victims feel less powerful because they can't fight back right away or something like that? Because sometimes, like, even when, you know, like say for rape, I watch a lot of SVU. It's one of my favorite things. And of course, it's always the rape victims. But the shows where, and I know this is TV, but I've also kind of seen this in real life too. The points at which you were able to either get your attacker to go to jail for life, or he gets some kind of punishment that makes him pay for what he did or what she did, it always seems like it's a little less traumatic, or it doesn't impact the victim as much. Right or wrong? I don't know.
Well, I'm curious what show you were watching.
It was probably SBU or some one of those shows, yeah.
Okay, because what's the show with Michaela Cole on HBO? It's a very good show on like the experience of a rape survivor. I can't think of it, but I thought you were talking about that show. Okay, so I think this is a really great question, and it depends. It's both and. I don't think it's one or the other. Okay. But if we go deeper, because I am a therapist, this has so much to do with power and control. Right. Because trauma, or experiencing trauma, is essentially to lose your power of oneself. And if revenge fantasies, like revenge dreams, are actually quite common for trauma survivors. But if I just want to invite us, right, this collective, to like think about revenge of, if in a way, as a way to like regain your power. This is why for so many people, survivors, like having their perpetrator get, sentenced, be held accountable, is so incredibly liberating, because you get some sort of closure. Closure, okay. Yeah. Right? And closure is important.
Better word.
Oh, the TV show is I May Destroy You on HBO.
Oh my God, I love that.
Such
love. Okay.
That was a really fantastic portrayal.
Yes.
Of a trauma incident, the trauma symptoms she was experiencing, and her healing journey, which was messy. Can you curse on this platform?
Yeah.
Oh, messy as fuck.
Right.
It was messy as fuck. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
And yeah, it was messy. And that's what it looks like. It's not linear. Yeah. One day you're like all zen and you can like check in with yourself, and then you have a moment, right? But I also, another thing that I wanna share, because your platform serves the folks that it serves. Sometimes we talk about trauma as like this like thing that happens, but if you're a person of color in this country, you're probably carrying some trauma, and it doesn't like just to, there is something called institutional traumas.
Yeah, sure, there is, yes.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we talk about trauma and it's like, oh, this far away, this really bad thing that happened. But it's like, if you're queer, if you're Black, if you
Immigrant.
immigrant
Mm-hmm.
background, undocumented, like you have probably like experienced
Right.
some or all of the things we are discussing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is it is a sad reality in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also just like, to be alive, you will experience suffering,
Absolutely.
trauma, pain, right?
Yeah.
There's also that too.
Tips. You have some tips for us.
I have some tips. So I came up with five tips, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the first one, which is my favorite one, is,
mm-hmm.
or the one I think is most impactful, is movement.
Ooh, where is Joy? In the house?
Joy, where are you, Joy?
Movement. Wow.
Yeah. What we know is that, and this is a good question when you ask me, like, should everyone just go to therapy? What I see is like a lot of rationalization, a lot of headiness about what has happened and how I'm going to organize my life so that this thing no longer impacts me and I am a stupid person. And like, it is like, trauma is all body, baby. Like, we are animals, we are just years ago, we were living in not in these cities, and fear and anxiety were the things that kept us alive. They were indicators, like, if you don't move, you're gonna get snatched up by a tiger. Right. So but now the tiger's something else, right?
Right.
And so
a really good analogy.
so much is like, so this is why I had a little trouble. So this is like a 1-2 step, but it's like movement and mindfulness, which means like paying attention, right? Developing that awareness about what arises, right, in the body. That's gonna let you know real quick. Now, then the mind comes in, and it's like what you think about it, right? And that's also important in talk therapy and psychotherapy. But we also have to develop coping skills to regulate the things that arise. We can't talk that one out of ourselves. We have to learn how to work with our nervous system, which has been taxed.
Right.
Yeah. So movement, mindfulness. So the movement is to kind of like engage the thing you're noticing, right? If you're noticing like a lot of we often like store a lot in like our bellies.
Yes.
Like our center here. One thing I do with clients is just I like to call it like the hand of like your wise hand, like a wiser version of yourself. Right. Just to put your hand on your stomach and just care and attend to that fear, that anxiety. Just like attend to it. I don't want to hear what needs to go away. It's just like, if we could just meet it with love, really. So starting there. So mindfulness, movement. So that's 2, right?
Right. I like it. I like these.
Yeah. Another one is connection, because we know that trauma is essentially to lose connection to the self. And so when we are in community, we are able to connect with others, but parts of ourselves connect with parts of others' self.
Right.
Community is so important. There's a support group, your church, your coworker who gets it, who gets you. Like, please do not to want to go through this alone is just hurting yourself.
Yeah. And many times we choose that. because we think we don't want to burden people or, but community. I've been seeing the power of community.
Oh my God.
Lately. I mean, this whole pandemic has shown us the power of community, actually.
Right?
So I hope we continue and don't forget post-COVID that we still need each other.
Absolutely. And I think a big one is like, I don't want to be a burden to anyone. And it's like, your people are gonna like rise to the occasion. Like, so yeah. Okay. Well, that's another one is maybe you'll give Joy another shout out, but nature. I heard someone's becoming a mom plant. Is a plant mom?
Yes, somebody else is becoming a plant mom.
I know, that's beautiful. Your orchids are gorgeous.
Borrowed orchids.
I mean, nature just has healing powers of its own.
Absolutely. One of my friends is away working near the water right now, and she called me today. She said, "I cannot tell you, it's so different. It's so needed, so necessary. We've been stuck inside for some of us for an entire year. I can't imagine what a couple of days in nature is going to do for us. Nature has always been very healing for me, particularly. Like, I love the water. Okay. And I lived in Miami for a while, so, I was there all the time. So I get jealous that you're able to do that now, but it's well deserved.
Yeah. So you brought up a good point, because you said like nature, water is very healing for me. So I think it's like nature is like, there's a lot in that word. So I would encourage or invite folks to notice what about nature is the thing that they like.
It suits them, right?
Yeah, because you don't gotta like backpack at Machu Picchu. You don't gotta do all that. Right. If that's not what you're trying to do. But if it's like having a plant that you can care for, or sitting by. I used to love jogging when I lived in New York. I used to love jogging by the East River. Like, it was just yeah. And it's a dirty river, but it's not even, it's kind of gross. But it just, the water just really centered me.
Seek those things that bring you peace, I think is what it is. So whatever in nature brings you peace, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Okay. And you have one more for us?
One more? Oh, I've already done.
You have two more?
I have two more.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay. Another one that I am really just really feeling like for the past year is a self-compassion practice. There is a really powerful practice called RAIN. So for people who are a little more systematic, structured, the practice of RAIN, which you can Google on YouTube and find like quick 10-minute, 15-minute videos. I really encourage this because compassion and love is the way to healing. So if we can turn that towards ourselves, and towards the parts of ourselves that are deprived and in need of love, really, then we're on a really great path. And I think a self-compassion practice really provides that.
RAIN is an acronym. Is it an acronym?
Yes. Okay. So R is for recognize. A is for acknowledge. And this we're all doing very softly and gently with ourselves. I is for just investigate, right? The quality of what's coming up, just investigating. And then N is to nurture what is coming up. One thing that I like to do with clients is to think of themselves or the part of themselves that feels pain or discomfort as like a child, like a baby, and how they would respond and care for that baby, right? With gentleness, with care, very, very soft. Yeah. And there are, we all have our inner child and parts of ourselves. Like those are easy parts of ourselves to access.
Right.
And in my work, I do a lot of guiding and facilitating of that.
This is good. I feel like I have a lot of work to do. You're giving me homework.
And then last one. Go to therapy. No,
I mean, I'm all
no, not
for
you.
that.
I'm just saying, like, therapy. I'm a big. Oh, sorry.
No. I was gonna say that is great advice for everybody. I think at some point in everybody's life they should. Yeah.
So I also want to acknowledge, as someone who is a therapist, and like I also work in a school. The road, I always say this, the road to therapy has obstacles depending on your socioeconomic background. Like it is not so simple for everyone.
Right.
And I think that's really worth mentioning. So I wanted to just expand that and kind of like, if you are unable because you're uninsured, even though there are great services, especially in like big cities, but let's say you're in a rural place, mentorship, I know you're all about that.
Yeah.
Just like finding spaces that feel transformative and safe in the meantime. But like that work of like self-reflection and just like deep healing in very deep and real ways is really it's an investment in yourself.
Right.
It's a great investment. So
wow, Gina, you have exceeded all my expectations for this chat, and I love it. Oh my gosh, this has been such a wonderful chat. I want to give you some hearts and stuff, but I can't do that from here because of course I'm live.
It's fine.
But this is good.
Yes, I want to recommend a book for folks who want to do some My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa. My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa. I'm forgetting his last name. But if you are, if you want to do some, you're okay.
I'm gonna find it.
Resmaa Menakem.
Resmaa Menakem. Yes.
Yes, it's a fantastic book. Dope therapist, Black man. Like it's got all of the elements, body, racial. Like it's deep. But it's just a great read to kind of learn more and also do some body work also. So, yes.
So what are you doing these days besides therapizing?
Just going to the beach. It's just like at the beach every day.
Wow. All right, guys, I'll put the information there for the book for you. My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa. Maybe we should make this a community reading project because you guys know we have a bookshop. I will add it to the bookshop so you guys can go get it there. Hopefully it's available there. I'll definitely read this. I'll definitely read it and give it as gifts for Christmas.
Also, Mel, like, thank you so much for having this space for us to just share and extend our resources across the community. Yeah, it's very
this is very special to me. So it's also very special when you guys can come on and share your wisdom, because I feel like we have so much wisdom within ourselves in our community, each one of us, and so if we could share it on these platforms, hell yeah, why not? It's part of the work. So
yes.
So where can folks find you, Gina? What are you doing? You're writing. I see you're writing. I've been
writing.
I've been reading.
I'm writing. Thank you. I'm writing. I'm seeing clients. I'm getting ready to start some groups for survivors of sexual violence. Using like Black feminist liberation text of like pleasure liberation, like Audre Lorde, bell hooks.
I love it. Woo.
Yes.
Powerful. Wow.
I know. So we're gonna like heal and then like, burn stuff. Okay. So my Instagram is Palo Santo de Los Santos. And that's where you can find me for now. I'm working on my website and, slowly coming along.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much, Gina, for coming on.
Thank you.
Guys,
Thank
this is
you.
Gina De Los Santos. Please go follow her. Her work is amazing, and she's growing, as we all are.